In this video, we begin our discussion on Chapter 3, where our objectives for the chapter will be to go over product demand as well as product supply, to then put the two together in order to examine a product market to see how the price and quantity level for a specific good or service is determined. Where in terms of today, we seek to develop product demand by considering some preliminaries to then go over the circular flow as well as consumer problem, to then discuss product demand and conclude by distinguishing between a change in quantity demanded versus a change in demand. Beginning with our preliminaries, our overview for the field of economics was the following. Agents have an unlimited amount of wants, but a finite quantity of resources, where our result of this axiom was scarcity. And due to scarcity, consumers and firms must then choose how to use their resources to fulfill wants, where when our agent types interact with one another, the result will be a market in which we can have a market for products or a market for factors of production. And when we look at the sum of a particular market, the result will generate us an aggregate market, where in terms of these markets and aggregate markets, sometimes they may fail such that the government will want to intervene, and in terms of this government intervention, sometimes too the government can fail with their intervention strategies. Now, if we take a step back and just consider the aggregate interactions between our agents, we can model this graphically via the circular flow. That is, a model of the economy that shows how agents interact in aggregate markets. Where here we have our graphical representation in the middle, where on the left we have our consumers, on the right we have our firms, on the top we have our product markets, on the bottom we have our factor markets, in the middle we have our government agents, and if we are to consider an open economy, then we have our foreign agents in both our product and factor markets as well. Now, in terms of how this graph is read, starting on the left with our consumers, they will use their resource of time to supply labor in the factor markets that firms will demand in order to produce goods and services with, that they then supply in the product markets, where when they sell these goods and services, that will generate them a revenue stream, where a portion of that revenue stream will then be used to pay off labor in the factor markets, where the difference between revenue and costs in the factor markets will be profits for the firm. Now, returning back to the product markets, goods and services will be demanded by consumers, and they will purchase these goods and services with the income that they generated in the factor markets. Then the cycle repeats itself over and over. If we introduce our government agents, along the way in our factor markets, the government will also use labor provided by our consumers in order to provide services to both consumers as well as firms. Now, if we consider an open economy, we can introduce our foreign agents, in which we'll consider them both in product markets as well as factor markets, in that we can have domestic consumers and firms seeking to purchase foreign goods and services. Likewise, we can have foreign agents seeking to purchase domestic goods and services. In terms of the factor markets, similar. We can have domestic agents seeking to use foreign factors of production, and likewise, we can have foreign agents seeking to use domestic factors of production. So then, with our overview of the circular flow in mind, we now would like to begin and develop a base level interaction between consumers and firms. This will be done by developing the product market for a single good or service, and will allow us to examine how price and quantity is determined for a specific good or service. In order to do this, though, this will require us to examine consumers, which will be our discussion for today, firms, and then putting the two together to examine a market. So let us begin by recalling our setup for consumers. They have an unlimited amount of wants in terms of purchasing goods and services and engaging in leisure time, but they are limited by their resources of time and income. We formally stated their problem as maximizing utility, subject to the budget constraint, where consumers will use time for leisure or to work for an income process such that they supply labor, and they will use their income to purchase goods and services with, such that they demand goods and services, where this will be our focus for today as we seek to develop a product market as opposed to a labor market. So, with product demand in mind, what is the formal definition? Well, product demand is the ability and willingness to buy specific quantities of a good at alternative prices in a given time period, holding all else equal, or ceteris paribus. where this is the result of the consumer problem, where the agent is using their resource of income to fulfill their wants of consuming goods and services, where this will be determined by a consumer comparing additional satisfaction received from a good or service compared to its price. That is, if additional satisfaction is greater than the price of the good, the consumer will purchase more of the good, whereas if additional satisfaction from the good or service is strictly less than the price, then the consumer will not go through with the purchase, whereas if additional satisfaction is equal to the price of the good, the consumer will go through with the purchase of the good, but they will purchase no more or no less of the good or service in question, where this comparison made by the consumer will be determined by factors such as the preferences they have over this good or service, the amount of income they have, the prices of substitute goods, where substitute goods are goods that fulfill the same role as one another, such as ground beef and ground turkey, fulfilling the role as a protein source in a single meal. Additionally, we have the prices of complementary goods, where complementary goods are goods that are frequently consumed in ratios of one another. Or we can think about this in terms of consuming both a protein and a carbohydrate source in a single meal. Or if we were to look at a bicycle, in order to have an operational bike, you need to purchase one frame and two tires. If you have one tire and one frame, it does you no good in terms of having an operational bike. Whereas if you have three tires and one frame, you have an operational bike, but you have a leftover part in terms of one extra tire. But if you have two tires and one frame, you have one operational bike and no excess parts. In terms of additional determinants, we also have expectations in terms of how the consumer perceives the future will impact the decisions they make today, which we can think about in terms of future income and future prices on goods and services. And lastly, when we look at the overall market, the amount of consumers that seek to purchase a particular good or service will matter. Now, in terms of product demand, a key feature of it will be that it is downward sloping due to the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded that we can state via the law of demand. That is, the quantity of a good demanded in a given time period increases as its price falls, given no other changes or ceteris paribus. That is, as satisfaction for consuming additional units of a good declines, consumers will not be willing to purchase more of the good unless price falls as well. We're illustrating this, let us consider an example of a starved consumer that goes to a restaurant for food. They make a purchase of a slice of pizza, which brings them satisfaction since they are not as hungry now. Now, in terms of purchasing a second slice of pizza, they go through with the decision in that it brings them additional satisfaction, but not as much satisfaction as that first slice of pizza, since they have already eaten that first slice and are not as hungry as they were before. Now, in terms of a third slice of pizza, they do not go through with the purchase of the third slice since they are not as hungry anymore, and the additional satisfaction that third slice would bring them is not worth it when compared to the price point of the slice of pizza. However, though, let us consider that this is a frequent customer to this restaurant, and now the restaurant lowers the price of pizza for this particular customer. Now, when they go through when evaluating this third slice of pizza, since the price of pizza is now cheaper, when they're evaluating that third slice, the additional satisfaction from this third slice is less than the second slice, and for sure less than the first slice, but now with a reduced price point, they now deem it worth it and they go through with the purchase of a third slice of pizza. Now, in terms of graphically representing product demand, we can do so by examining the demand curve, which we have on the right, where the price of a good or service is going to be on the vertical axis and its quantity level is going to be on the horizontal axis. And we also have the demand schedule, which will give us the corresponding points, price points, and quantity demanded, where at point A, when the price of a slice of pizza is $7, this consumer is willing and able to purchase one slice of pizza, whereas when the price point is $5, this consumer is willing and able to purchase 3 slices of pizza as indicated by point B. And at point C, at a price point of $3, this consumer is willing and able to purchase 5 slices of pizza. And at point D, at a price point of 1, this consumer is willing and able to purchase 7 slices of pizza. Where when we consider movements from point A to D, that is rightward movement along the product demand curve, we see that as price decreases, quantity demand increases. Whereas if we consider movements from point D to point A, that is leftward movements of the product demand curve, we'll observe that price increases, then quantity demand decreases, where these are just restatements of the law of demand, that is, that inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Now, with this in mind, what happens if product price changes? What we'll have then is a change in quantity demanded, that is, movement along the demand curve due to a change in the price of that good, which is precisely what we saw in the prior slide when we considered movements from point A to D or movements from D to A. Well, to further illustrate this, let us go through this with our example of the starved consumer. Consider the case of the starved consumer that goes to the restaurant. And in this first case, the starved consumer goes to the restaurant and observes the price of pizza and is on point A. We're looking at our product demand curve, price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis. We have our initial product demand curve, and we are at point B in that they are willing and able to purchase 3 slices of pizza, given that the current price point is $5 per slice. Now, let us suppose that the starved consumer goes to the restaurant. However, now that the restaurant has increased its prices on pizza, such that the price of pizza is now $7 per slice. With this increase in price, the consumer observes this, and they are now only willing and able to purchase 1 slice of pizza. So we have leftward movement along the product demand curve due to an increase in price. Now, lastly, let us suppose the consumer goes to the restaurant and they observe that the restaurant has decreased the price on their pizza. If we started at point B, when we have a decrease in the price point, say now to $3, and the consumer observes this, they are now willing and able to purchase 5 slices of pizza due to this reduction in price. So a reduction in price corresponds to a change in quantity demanded that leads to rightward movement along the product demand curve. So then if a change in price corresponds to a change in quantity demanded, what happens if a non-price determinant of demand changes? What we'll have then is a change in demand, that is, a shift in the demand curve due to a non-price determinant of demand changing, where these shifts can be left or rightward shifts of the product demand curve, where these shifts will be based off of changes of preferences, the amount of income the consumer has, the prices on substitute goods as well as complementary goods, how they perceive the future, where we'll be focusing on expectations in terms of their income, as well as the amount of consumers in the market, where the corresponding determinant and how it needs to change, leading to a rightward or leftward shift, is summarized in the table below, but we will work through 2 graphical examples in the following slide. So, let us consider the example of the starved consumer once again, where initially we have that the starved consumer goes to the restaurant and observes the price of pizza and is currently on point B. Returning to our product demand curve, price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis, we have our downward sloping product demand curve, inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. The consumer observes the price point of pizza is $5. They're willing and able to purchase 3 slices and are at point B. Let us now consider the following scenario. The starved consumer goes to the restaurant, but now they have more income and they observe that the price of the pizza is the same. So pizza price is $5. The consumer now has more income. So this leads to a rightward shift of their budget constraint due to having more of their scarce resource of income. So they now have a greater amount of options available to them. With this greater amount of options available to them, holding the price of pizza constant, that means they're going to be able to purchase more slices of pizza than before, which we can represent with the rightward shift of the product demand curve going from product demand to product demand 1 in purple, where now they're willing and able to purchase 5 slices of pizza at the price point of $5. Now lastly, let us consider the case of the starved consumer going to the restaurant and they observe the price of chicken wings, a substitute goods, so it fulfills the same role as being a meal, have lowered compared to the price point of pizza. Well, if both of these goods fulfill the role as a meal and chicken wings are now cheaper, the consumer is going to purchase more chicken wings and less slices of pizza. So we can represent this with the leftward shift of the product demand curve, going from product demand to product demand 2 in green, in which holding the price of pizza constant at $5, now the consumer is willing and able to purchase 1 slice of pizza. With this in mind, what we'll pick up in our next video is by considering product supply.